This is not a phenomenon. This is a construct. It's an idea. In the normal circumstances, there is an amount of glucose in the blood, and it's there because the tissues need it. Now, that doesn't mean you need to eat glucose. Your body makes all the glucose it needs itself. So let's not get confused about that.
Could you please explain to the public here what diabetes is and what it isn't?
Cool. Well, thanks for having me. It's really a pleasure to come and cross-pollinate, and glad to be here. Right, type 2 diabetes is elevated blood glucose chronically and nothing else. That's what it is. That's how it's diagnosed. That's the pathology, and that's the thing that any interventions that are suggested are supposed to have an effect on. Let's get this blood sugar down. So that's the pathology. That's what's wrong. That's what they're trying to fix. That's what they're diagnosing. That's what it is.
Yep.
It is a blood glucose dysfunction. You have too much glucose in your blood chronically. That's the type 2 diabetic presentation. From there, what we are told by almost everybody out there, the so-called gold standard consensus opinion, here's what they'll tell you. Well, the reason that your blood glucose is elevated is because you have this mystical, magical thing called insulin resistance.
Yep. There it is.
That's what they'll tell you. And they'll say that's the actual etiology. That's the underpinning cause of the diabetes. That's the cause of the problem. No. Insulin resistance is a construct, which means this is a measurement, a variable, something that we are appending a value to of some kind, but it's not something we are directly measuring. There is no such thing as an insulin resistance meter. You cannot, well, you can do a Google search if you like and see if you can find a company that makes a Google resistance, that's what they really should make, an insulin resistance meter.
Yeah.
You won't find one. They don't exist. This is not a physiological response. This is not an actual thing. This is not a phenomenon. This is a construct. It's an idea. And what we are told universally by the so-called gold standard authorities on this is that this so-called insulin resistance is a pathology. Absolutely, because it's that which leads, they say, to the elevated blood glucose. Okay. Actually, what they are observing by taking the readings that they are taking and putting into their magical little sums that make up this thing called insulin resistance, what they're actually looking at is the efficacy with which glucose is allowed to enter the cells of your body from the blood. Usually what happens in the normal circumstances, there is an amount of glucose in the blood, and it's there because the tissues need it. Now, that doesn't mean you need to eat glucose. Your body makes all the glucose it needs itself. So let's not get confused about that. There is glucose in your blood. Your body puts it there. It's called gluconeogenesis if you want to look it up. Fine. That glucose is there because the cells need it. When the cells need some glucose, they will allow that glucose to enter that cell. And that is mediated from the outside by insulin, the thing we're talking about. So insulin binds to the GLUT4 transporter in such a way as to make it active for transporting glucose into the cell. And that's what happens. Glucose pours into the cell. Until such a time as that cell, because of inside environment, decides, I have enough sugar now. I don't want any more sugar. Here's what they do. The cell locks that GLUT4 transporter from the inside so that no amount of insulin knocking on the door trying to bring the sugar in will work. The transporter is deactivated. It's a thing called the Randall cycle. We've known about it since 1963 when it was published by Sir Philip Randall. It's a piece of physiology that you won't find in many textbooks. You won't hear it being discussed by those in the know, so-called, in physiology. It's been largely swept under the old carpet there since 1962 or 3. My opinion on the reason for it being swept under the carpet is because it ran at odds with what Ansel Keys was saying at the time. And Ansel Keys was a very powerful figure by then, and it was Ansel Keys and his influence that stomped on this thing, I would suggest. Nonetheless, it is a thing. It does exist. It is part of your metabolic process, and it's designed to protect your cells from what's it called? We'll call it damage. Like, that's the word. Thank you. Glycation. Goodness, I've been losing words since I turned 50. I wonder if that's a sign. Glycation. Yes, it's a damage called glycation. It's glucose and fructose molecules binding to the various structures of your body, your cellular structures, the proteins and things like that, thus changing their conformation and interfering with their function. It's a form of progressive tissue damage that leads to the complete dysfunction of your tissues. Not a good thing. So how we protect our cells from that damage is we make sure that the amount of glucose entering the cells is limited. And then we have a sacrificial lamb, if you like, or a sacrificial anode, if you want to think in nautical terms, where you have the red blood cells and the cells that line the vascular tree, the endothelial cells. Those can get damaged by high amounts of glucose and fructose, but that's okay because every X number of days, about a month, you're going to slew all of those cells out of there, the red cells and the endothelial cells, and they're all going to be replaced with new ones. Because those cells are very simple, they're very easy to reproduce very quickly. They actually derive directly from CD34 plus adult stem cells, as it turns out. Isn't that interesting? We'll talk about those later if it becomes relevant to this discussion. So what your cell is doing there is locking the door from the inside to say, I've got enough sugar, thanks, we don't need any more. And if you continue to pour sugar into the bloodstream inappropriately, that will have the toxic effect of destroying your red blood cells and your endothelial cells, but it won't do the same level of damage to the more important tissues. So that's what's really going on. Nothing to do with this so-called insulin resistance. That's just nonsense.
Okay.
It's your body doing exactly what it's designed to do. It is reacting. Your genes are reacting to the environment in which they are placed at the time.
Right.
Basically. They're doing exactly what they should do. Those genes having survived at least 3,800 million years. Probably much longer than that, it seems. So that's that one. Insulin resistance? No.
So to wrap it up, it's really not an issue with insulin, the hormone. That is not the pathology. It's about the elevated blood glucose levels. So the way that is typically diagnosed is through blood testing. Is that correct? Through the HbA1c levels, or a continuous glucose monitoring, over a period of time.